And joining me today here in the room is Jamie Dix. Jamie and I have been working in this space together for a while. Jamie got her undergraduate degree in education, but realized as much as she loves kids, teaching them is not her favorite thing in the world. And so she started to get really involved in this idea about what makes people tick. She's a great connector. Jamie is that person that actually enjoys sitting down in an airplane and getting to know people. And she's channeled that by working with a lot of our businesses and the organizations that we work with, facilitating, helping to customize content for what we do, and doing a lot of really good executive coaching with a lot of our clients. And so taking us through the first part of this is Jamie Dix.
Thanks, John. Yes, he is correct. I actually never stepped foot inside of a children's classroom because I knew even before I left college that I didn't want to teach children, and I do have two of them, so I do really like kids. Okay, here we go. A little bit about Chapman & Co. I am not going to spend a huge amount of time giving you a big sales pitch because I want to get into listening and what makes a great listener. But we like to build organizations that you can be proud of. We come from a foundation of believing that you can run a really successful business and also deeply care about the people in it. So some of the things that we offer are assessments, leadership development. We have a number of training courses that we can do. We also do a lot of custom content for whatever you think your organization might need. Workshops and keynotes, and then we also do consulting. We came from an organization or under the umbrella of an organization called Barry Waymiller, which you may not recognize the name, and that's totally fine, but I bet you recognize a lot of those products in the bottom left-hand part of my screen there. We do packaging, labeling, sort of anything that has to do with any sort of product we have our hands probably on in some way. We make the machines that do that. So we are a unique blend of 106 acquired companies. We have 12,000 team members across the globe and 200 locations worldwide. The reason that bottom piece of information on the screen, the revenue and the share price, is not to say like, hey, look at us, we're so great, but just to say that the content we're going through today, we actually started in Barry Waymiller. So it's not to say these skills are sunshine and rainbows and like we talk about them being the soft skills and happy puppies. We can care about our people and give them actual skills that make this a really successful business. So that's a little bit about who we are and where we come from. For the next piece, I want to just talk about what we're going to do today. So we're going to try and answer why is listening so important and what actually gets in the way of doing that sometimes. And then obviously how we can practice at getting better at it. So let's just level set here. When we talk about listening, we like to just say, here's what we mean by that. It's to hear something with thoughtful intention, and that's it. And what the interesting thing is, in one of our courses, we ask, what do great leaders do? And it doesn't matter if we're in a nonprofit, if we're in a huge company, high school kids we've done this with. When we ask this question, the most common response is that we listen. It's in the top 3 every single time. So I'm going to ask Maria to launch our first poll question here. In a typical business day, how much time do we spend listening? And I'd love for you guys to throw your responses up in there. Is it 9%, 45%, 16%, or 30%? In a typical business day, how much time do we spend listening? Keep them coming. Awesome. We have everyone recorded there. So if you answered 45%, you would be correct. In a typical business day, we spend about 45% listening. Our next question I'm going to ask Maria to launch is what percentage of team members actually think their leader listens well? What percentage of team members think their leaders listen well? Is it 2%? Is it 9%? Is it 15% or 24%? Fantastic. We're at 9% there. Thank you guys so much for participating. We're going to do that a number of times throughout our time together today. But just really a quick here, we pulled this from the Harvard Business Review. These are some of the communication and issues that people have said prevent effective leadership. And at the very top one, not recognizing employee achievement. And I would say for us, and something I think we all have in common, no matter where you are, is that we want to know that what we do and who we are matters. So these are some of the communication issues that actually prevent effective leadership. The last question I want us to think about is what percent of professionals do you think have actually had formal training in leadership skills, in listening skills, I'm sorry. What percentage have actually had formal training in listening skills? A couple more, I'll just wait just a couple more seconds there. All right. If you answered 2%, you would be correct. 2% of professionals have actually had some sort of formal training in listening, which is really, really interesting to us. Every time we ask that question, what do great leaders do? They listen, and yet so many of us have not actually had any formal training in there. So we have a class that we called Relate, and we will spend 2 days on listening and on the communication cycle and what we mean by advanced communication skills. And this is our formula for it. So listening, we've already talked about hearing something with thoughtful intention. The reason we have to start with listening at the foundation of that is that so that we can discern what we need to do next. Maybe we need to coach. Maybe we need to give a new perspective. There are lots of other things that we can do to discern what our next move is so that we can relate and make a really good connection with somebody that's trying to talk to us. But we won't know what to do unless we really have that foundation of listening.
So thanks, Jamie. So that's a little bit of the context, so that here's something with thoughtful intention is where we're going to jump off. And that thoughtful intention is really important to think about, because call us optimists, call us really happy, peppy people. We tend to think that most people go into conversation with really good intentions. So what happens if we know that listening is an important skill for us to practice? What happens? And we're going to cover just 3 of the things. One, just the way human beings are wired to communicate and interact with each other. We're going to talk a little bit about how some of the things that we've learned to process information, the things that we've learned growing up, our preferences and our styles, can actually start to hinder us when we're having a conversation with someone else. And we're going to talk about an important barrier for leaders. Most of us got into where we are because we're really good problem solvers. We're really good at helping people. We are really good at helping people connect dots. And sometimes how that translates in a really busy schedule and in a really busy day is that we tend to like to try to solve people's problems for them or get them to see our way. Acceptance versus agreement is a way of looking at listening as actually trying to just understand first and then coach second. So let's break this down a little bit. Jamie will testify to the fact that I'm a big neuroscience geek, and so I'm going to try to simplify this a little bit. But let's just start with the biology of listening and how it happens. And we're going to start that by asking you, what do you think in a typical conversation, how fast can you process what someone is saying to you? So Maria just launched another poll. Let's hear what you all think. Let's hear what you all think. How fast in a typical conversation can your brain actually churn out what's going to be said? Or when you're about to say something, how quickly can you come up with it? So we see a lot of 450 words, a couple 130 words. Got about half people in the poll. Let's see if we can get a couple more people chiming in. So actually the answer is, most of you got that correct. It is 450 words per minute. Amazingly, neuroscientists at Columbia University were able to put people in a MRI scanner, ask them questions, and realize and be able to see in the brain how quickly people are able to process. And it's about 450 words per minute. Now that can ebb and flow based on how much coffee you've had and how we're going. But to make the point, let's look at the flip side of that. How fast can the average person actually form words to speak? So you've thought up with those 450 words, you put it together, someone asks you a question, how fast can you actually speak? 1,000 words a minute, wow, we got a good fast talker here. 130 words per minute. Couple more answers, we'll give it a couple more seconds. 450 words per minute. I wish we could speak as quickly as we think, but that same study tells us that actually we can only speak at about 150 words per minute. Last thing from this study about how our brains are able to process information, just a little bit about attention span. 1 hour after this webinar, how much of this content will you actually retain? So think for a second. Now, I'd like to say that Jamie and I are going to be the most dynamic people, but we are all subject to this biology a little bit. There's the poll. Thank you, Maria. 1 hour after this webinar, how much do you think you're going to retain? Again, assuming Jamie and I are really, really compelling. So we've got about 10%, about a little bit less than 50%. The actual answer is about 25%. The way our brains store information, we bring a lot of stuff in, sift it out. This is where listening, folks, can be really, really important. With really powerful listening skills, we're able to let our brains, our mouths catch up with our brains. We're able to really focus our attention in ways where we're not just sieving out information that we may want later. The other one that we're going to talk about is this idea of filters, barriers, and blockers. And to tee that up, I just want to talk about what we've learned as the general communication cycle when someone really is seeking to interact or communicate with someone else. I'm going to tell you a little story about this. Jamie said I had a bit of a theater career. And one of the jobs, I was hired to come into a theater company, a rather large theater company that was really, really struggling. They were having a hard time. A big part of theater is it is entertainment, folks. And in a lot of cases, it's expensive entertainment. Taking care of the customers is most important. And I inherited a team member, we'll call him Travis, who was in charge of the box office and taking care of the customers on the nights of performance. And I was really frustrated with some decisions he was making. And because I wanted him to learn, I thought that the best way for me to connect with him was to actually call out real time when something was not going right so that we'd be able to have a follow-up conversation on how to correct it later. So I crafted this message. I tried really hard to sort of not be frustrated. And I saw a situation where 15 minutes before curtain time, he had one of the slowest people at the box office, and I wanted to call him out. So I walked up, I said, hey, Travis, using my best sort of like calm voice, pulled him aside and said, you know what, do we really want to put Tom here when all of these people are in line? So then, as he was receiving it, I could see Travis sort of decoding what I was saying. I saw the verbals, I saw his arms get all crossed, shrugged up, really, really tense, and I could just see like this blast shield go down in front of him, and everything sort of shut down. So I waited for a response. Next day, nothing. Day after that, nothing. Then I start hearing through the grapevine that Travis is telling everybody on our team, hey, I cannot believe how humiliated I am after John called me out in front of all of my colleagues and all of our customers and embarrassed me about something. And that was the response I got. None of this was what I intended. I was really succumbing to what we call filters, barriers, and blockers, which were all of my good intentions being totally waylaid and blown apart by some filters that I was using that distorted how I was looking at the situation, some barriers between Travis and I, and that Travis was setting up in front of me, and some of the blockers that were keeping us from really being able to talk. So example in that situation of a filter that really sort of distorted it was my background of really feeling like I had a lot of really good answers for how this was going to happen and what the best way of delivering that was going to happen. And so when I approached Travis, it was coming from my own experience. The barrier I had is my communication preference is immediate and fast feedback from people. I like to know what's happening. I like to have it direct. I like to rip the Band-Aid off. I have learned the hard way. Not everybody in the world is like that. Some people need a little bit more of a soft skill. And then the blockers can really be jargon things. Outside of the example I've been using, we work a lot with a major airline where we have in the room when we're facilitating programs, pilots, techs, mechanics. And Jamie, you've been there right there with me, and we start hearing a lot of initials and things and D0 and this and that. It can be really hard. The shorthand that we develop with colleagues that we know really, really well can actually start to get in the way. So we want to open up the chat function. I'm sure a lot of you can relate or have had experiences with this. If you could go click on that chat box, make sure all panelists and attendees, and which of these filters, barriers, and blockers show up for you? Which are the ones that you know when you're having conversation? This is an opportunity for candid self-appraisal, folk. That's a big part of the leadership work that we do. But if we could just get a couple people to fill in that chat box, what are some of the filters, barriers, and blockers that show up for you?
Yeah, I think for me, when I look at this list, I grew up in a really small town in Western Kansas, and so my background is everybody talks to everybody, and we spend a lot of time talking. And so I look at now, I definitely can find myself talking too much. And when I'm communicating with somebody who tends to think in bullet points, it's just too much. They're trying to filter all of that information and try and really get at what I'm saying, which can be really challenging sometimes. So that's definitely where I find myself showing up.
Great. Jesse, thank you very much for calling out emotions, because we're going to talk about emotions a little bit through the context. The challenging thing with emotions is we like, especially in a professional setting, a lot of us have been taught to try to keep those keep those in the background and keep those in check, when actually emotions are always in play whether we want them to be or not. And acknowledging emotions can really help you work them constructively into the conversations. And it's really critical when you're listening to acknowledge those emotions and know where they're coming. Background is really a good one. How we have grown up and seen things, that sort of things that we carry with us, really can be one of the things that can impact the way we're hearing everything that we're doing. The trick here, and again, we're just trying to get some of these key things that we're awareness of, so when you're listening, you're being more aware of it. The key thing with filters and barriers and blockers is to just acknowledge that they may be happening. And as we go through the 5 listening skills, think about how they come up and how those skills can help you inoculate against those. George Bernard Shaw said it best: the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that has taken place. When we are not acknowledging filters, barriers, and blockers, we can kind of forget and we start writing our own scripts in our head. Listening helps us get past that. The next one we're going to talk about, I presented this idea of acceptance versus agreement. And the reason we're talking about it here is twofold. Acceptance versus agreement is this idea that we tend to look at conversations from our own perception. The way we get it around that is really practicing true empathy. And empathy, in the context that we're about to continue to talk about it, is this ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And the reason this is so important is when we're really good at what we're doing, when we just know we have the right answers, and most importantly, when we really care about other people, sometimes we tend to forget all of the things we know about them. Empathy means I'm having this conversation from the perspective of Jamie and what Jamie needs from me right now. Listening helps us get to that in a way where we can actually respond in the way that she needs it. How this shows up a lot of times is when we're getting in conversation is the initial responses we get. We're going to talk a little bit about this as empathetic responses and non-empathetic responses. Empathetic responses is showing that you understand. It's showing that you recognize that what they're saying is important to them. And it's accepting what they're saying without even necessarily agreeing to it. I'm going to put a little note. You'll see in a couple of slides here over the next little bit. We're going to give you examples of things to say. It's really important to make these words your own. When Jamie and I are out talking with people and when we're coaching and when we're consulting, we have a lot of people that want us to give them the magic wand and exactly the right things to say in the order to say it. We can't really help you there. We can give you some really good models, but if I walked up to somebody and said, wow, that must be really hard for you, probably if people who know me know that's just not language I'd use, Jamie might get a little bit better. So would you agree? I mean, that's that language thing that comes through.
Yeah, I think what John's offering, and he's totally right. If he said to me, wow, that must be really hard for you, I would immediately think he was being sarcastic. Now, tone and nonverbals obviously come to play in there, but what are you saying? Are you just aware? I think what we're trying to get at here is, are you aware that sometimes what we intend to say doesn't always come out that way?
Right. The really challenging thing is to be aware of the non-empathetic responses that, again, back to positive intent, we oftentimes use when we are actually trying to soothe people's emotions, when we are trying to show people that we've got an answer for them. And non-empathetic responses look like you're being a little bit dominating. They could be avoiding, and they could be judging. And the challenge here is again, as I said, a lot of these things like "you'll be fine" sounds like a really nice thing to say to somebody or someone you care about who's upset, but maybe that's not actually letting them talk about what's really going on. Are you serious? We say that jokingly, but it does sort of back there get into, hey, you really shouldn't be feeling this way. So when we're looking at responses and how we're listening and how we're acknowledging the people that we're listening, we really want to try to demonstrate that we are accepting what they're saying and that at least in this part of the conversation, we're not necessarily requiring agreement. So back to you, let's put that chat function back in. Which of the non-empathetic responses do you finding yourself using most often? And I want you to consider not just what you actually say, but what are some of the ones that you think about? Some of you, if you're the kind of person that really likes to be involved in webinars like this, may actually have gotten better, but what do you say and what do you think? So in that chat function again, which of the non-empathetic responses do you find yourself using more?
I think while you guys are thinking about your response, I would offer, I say you will be fine or it's okay all the time. And I think probably because I do actually believe that I am an eternal optimist, but I don't realize sometimes actually it might not be fine, or maybe they don't think it will be fine. And I don't really know that it will be fine. And so just that idea that we don't actually always know. My intent, of course, is genuine and I do care about them, but that would definitely be mine. Thanks, Dan. It looks like we're in agreement on that one. Kelly dominating. Yeah, I think time plays a big piece into this. How do we have the time to actually really listen? And again, just get on with it sounds pretty dominating, but if we're in a hurry, I can totally understand that. Yeah, and Chris, I think trying to sound relating or able to a similar thing happen is absolutely one thing we all do. We want to connect. We want to know that they're not alone, but sometimes that we will take over the conversation. Cool. All right. So what we would offer here is back one more. There we go. Thanks, guys. The most helpful thing that somebody can really do is to listen. And again, it's that foundational skill. It's the thing that comes up every time we say, what do great leaders do? They listen. And so just a quick story about a time that somebody listened to me and it had a huge impact on my life was prior to joining this team, I was doing very similar work at a smaller organization. And even before that, I was in a school. So I did actually I felt like I was really using that degree in education. I just never stepped into the classroom. But at the school, I was doing fundraising and admissions and anything that really had to do with people, which was really fun. I was there 11 years. But as you all know, schools are very cyclical. We do the same thing every year. Over and over. So I finally got tired of that. I went into leadership development and I immediately felt like I was behind the curve. We had multiple clients. I wasn't sure how to organize things. I didn't know what a strategic plan was at the time or what we were supposed to do. And I was struggling. I was asking a lot of questions, a lot of really small decisions that I think I should have been able to do. I wasn't. And so I reached out to my colleague who I'd been working with for a really long time already and just said, I think we need to meet. And I told her how I was feeling. I told her what was going on for me. I told her that I wasn't feeling successful in my role. And she just listened. She did not go into coaching mode. She did not go into just do this. I need you to do this. She really just listened. The impact is the event that we happened to be planning, I took care of. I mean, I did breakout sessions of transportation, all the things to pull these 250 people to Louisville, I took care of. And the meeting went off completely fine. The impact of her listening in that moment, though, helps me understand. I would have never thought that I would be facilitating a webinar, much less a group of 50 people, but her just listening gave me the insight that I could actually do this kind of work. And so that's why we say the most helpful thing a person can do is really listen. So I want you guys to think about just for a second, perhaps the last conversation that you had with somebody where they really just listened. What did they do in that conversation? And then also, how did it make you feel? So I want you guys to think about a time that you were recently listened to, just a couple words on what did they do to let you know they were listening and how did it make you feel? All right, I'm just going to give it a couple more. Yeah, thanks, Jesse. They didn't interrupt and you felt like your time was really being valued. Yeah, that's a really great one. Really just quieting your voice and not actually stop talking is a great way to tell someone you're listening. Dirk, you offered focus. They really focused on you and it made you feel valued. Great ones. I'm going to keep us moving along. The next thing I want to talk about is, there we go. When we think about listening, we think about listening in 3 different levels. The first level I want to talk about is faux listening. So it looks a lot like listening. You might actually be making eye contact, but your brain is thinking, well, at least in the Midwest, it's mid-afternoon. When can I get my next cup of coffee? I'm really tired. Or for some, it might be about lunchtime. It looks like listening, but it's not. So an example I like to give here is we started teaching this content 5 or 6 years ago. And I was at home doing dishes after dinner. And my little guy, Joey, was behind me and he's talking to me about daycare. I guess he was 5, so maybe kindergarten at that time. But I remember him saying, Mom, you're not even listening. And that completely got my attention. I turned around, I said, hey, buddy, how do you know I'm not listening? And he said, you're not even looking at me. And he's totally right. Like, I wasn't even giving my baby the respect of like looking at him. So faux listening, again, not actually listening. It may look like it, but it's not. The next level is factual listening. And this is really just listening for the facts. And this is perfectly acceptable if you need to make a decision at work. What are the facts that this person is telling you? You are just listening to the information that you need. It's another example is if somebody's giving you directions, you don't need to know about the feelings. You just need to know where you need to go. Factual listening. And then the last level that we're going to spend the rest of our time on today is empathetic listening. So you're not only listening to the facts that they're telling you, but how are they showing up? What is their body language like? What's the tone of their words? Really paying attention to that whole person is empathetic listening. So what this looks like, and I'm just going to do the high level 5 skills, is attending behavior, acknowledgement, door openers, silence, and an empathetic response. Those are the 5 skills of empathetic listening. That very first one is attending behavior. And the picture that's going to come up on the screen is a dog named Penny. And this is actually John's dog, Penny. I have met Penny. We went and stayed with John in San Diego. And if anything is attending behavior, I would say be like Penny. Penny is fully present all the time. The minute you walk in the door, she makes great eye contact. She does actually lean forward. She'll even turn her little head to the side. You have her full attention all the time. It's the same thing when somebody needs you to really listen to them. The first step is attending behavior. If you have a desk, if you have 2 chairs sitting in front of it when somebody comes in, the one chair is for them, the other chair is for you just to walk around and sit with that person as they're talking to you. That is attending behavior. Sometimes things get in the way of that attending behavior, and one of those things would be our cell phone. So I want you guys to think about, and I'm going to ask Maria to launch our next poll question. Where do you usually put your cell phone during a conversation? Do you put it face down on a desk or a table? Do you put it in your pocket? Do you put it in your briefcase or your purse, in a desk drawer, or in another room? Where do you put your cell phone during a conversation? And as I'm saying this, I can spy 2 of our cell phones, and they're not even face down, they're face up, which is really bad. I'm sure Maria's is on the table too. All right, so it looks like for the most part, you either put them face down on your desk or table, or you actually put it back in your purse. Great. The next question I want you to think about is, where do you think is the most effective place to put your cell phone? Where is the most effective place to put your cell phone? And same responses. Face down on a desk or table, in your pocket, in a briefcase, a desk drawer, or in another room. Where's the most effective place to put your cell phone? Okay, looks like about half of you have voted. All right. I'm going to pause it there. If you answered in another room, you would be correct. So it's interesting to think about. Like, we know the most effective place is to put it in another room, but we're just going to put it face down on a desk or a table. And I'm going to invite John to pipe in here for a second, because he really is into the neuroscience. And what's it like to have your cell phone out on a table?
Yeah, here's a challenge. The Neuro Leadership Institute, which does a lot of connecting neuroscience with how people work out in the field, did some studies. And I think some of you may have read a lot of these studies are out all over the place. They're just starting to be done. The average concentration of someone when your phone is within view is reduced by about 40% just by having that phone somewhere. If it rings or buzzes or anything goes off, it can take you a minimum of about 7 to 10 minutes to fully recover and get back engaged. So that's what they're saying with a study that, another study that went out, and I'll put the source on here because that one's not the Neuroleadership, actually did a study about the most effective place and completely out of sight and out of mind. And the reason we're pointing this home has to do with a great story that I'll tell you that sort of sums up. We were doing some work with a big retailer, and in one of our listen classes was the manager of about 300 people of a store in a town in Ohio, who reached out to me 3 months later to say that this conversation about cell phones changed his whole leadership practice, that he actually had people send him recognition for the fact that he made a very big show of putting his phone away when he was having conversations. Really kind of scary if you think about it, that a badge of honor now is that someone puts their phone away to talk to you. Yeah. But that's part of the importance of really thinking about your attending behavior and why we start there.
It means going on. It's saying, tell me more. It's saying, talk more about that. Or I can't wait to hear more. It's really offering something to them so that they go just a little bit deeper into their story. And there's a difference between a door opener and what we call data mining. So data mining is asking questions that probe others to answer what I want to meet my needs. And so I think about these as the who, what, when, where. And if you ever get to meet me in person, I'm a genuinely curious person, and I do want to know lots of information because I love humans. But that's about me. That's about wanting my needs met so that I know all the details. And what it prevents happening is for that person who's sitting in front of me able to really go on, and I might completely derail the road that they were going to go down by trying to get my needs met. So data mining versus door openers, again, they're just statements or questions that invite the other person to share what they want, and it really keeps the ownership of that conversation with them. Here's some great examples of door openers. When you said X, Y, or Z, what did you mean by that? Tell me more about that. How did that make you feel? And for some people, I know you might be rolling your eyes. Oh, how do you make you feel? But those emotions are really, really important, particularly if it's something that they really need to get off their chest, or if they're really bothered by something. We all have feelings. We cannot turn those feelings off, no matter how hard we try. My favorite question on here is, what was important to you about that story or about that situation? It really gives you an insight into what they value in their work or in their lives. So those are just some examples of door opener questions that we would use for listening. I want you guys to throw into the chat function, how long do you think it takes for a prolonged silence to feel awkward? So as we're sitting here doing these webinars, we're new to the webinar space. I'm used to having anywhere from 12 to 50 people sitting in front of me. I can actually handle silence easily for 15 to 20 seconds in a space. In a room with 3 people and no nonverbals looking back at me, I think that's gone down to about 3 seconds. It's really hard to ask a question and not have anything given back other than in chat. So as you think about conversations that you've had, I want you to put in the chat second. Thanks, Jesse. 30 seconds. How long for you do you think a prolonged silence is before it feels awkward? Jesse just offered 30 seconds.
Now Jamie's going to practice prolonged silence.
I promise I won't stay here for 30 seconds. But what do you guys think? Kelly offered 12 seconds. Yeah, it probably ranges for everyone. And this is something that we found. The average prolonged silence it takes for people to feel awkward is about 4 seconds, which is really interesting when you think about the human attention that we have is really dwindling. You'll see from this graph, the human attention span in 2000 was 12 seconds. We've gone down to 8 in 2013. Ask me how they measure the average attention span of a goldfish. I will not be able to tell you, but it's about 9 seconds. So as we think about that, silence is really, really important. And the reason it's important is because if we just offer them a door opener, if we just said, what's important to you about that? They actually need some time to think about it. So silence is really quieting your mind internally, really turning down those thoughts that are going in your head. Because I know when people come to me and they want to have a conversation about anything, I genuinely go to, how can I coach them or how can I fix this for them immediately? They might not need either of those for me. So turning down the voices in my head, which there sometimes are a lot, and actually stop talking. Just let them talk. The picture on the whiteboard is just to offer, if you find yourself veering away and having other thoughts, just picture your mind as a whiteboard and just wipe it away. The silence is really key for people to be able to get their full thoughts out to you. The only other thing I'll say about silence is you'll know you offered a good door opener if they look up at the ceiling, they look down at their shoes, or they break eye contact. That's when you know they're really, really thinking about it. That last one is empathetic response. So this conveys to that person that you really understand what they were trying to say to you. So this is sending back to them both the facts of what you heard and the feelings to let them know that you are empathetically there with them. So it sounds to me like XYZ and you're feeling this way. Or what I hear you're saying is, insert the facts and feelings. Or you're feeling this about whatever the situation was. It lets them know that you stayed tuned in the entire time and you really got at what they were trying to tell you. The reason we offer the feelings in there, and it's something that we like to say around our office, is specificity gives you access. The more specific you can be about the feeling, the more they're able to perhaps craft a response that's more intentional for them. So if somebody comes to me, I might immediately think they're upset or they're angry. It sounds like you're really angry about whatever the situation is. Instead, they actually might be really embarrassed, or they might actually be really, really annoyed. So getting really clear, it also gives them an opportunity to get a little bit clear about that. If I say you sound really angry, he or she may look at me and say, actually, no, I just felt really let down. It just lets them get really clear about how they're feeling. So again, when we talk about empathetic response, it's giving back both the facts and the feelings of what we're trying to convey to them.
So thanks, Jamie. So those are the 5 skills: tending behavior, acknowledgements, door openers, silence, and then important empathetic response, letting them know that you actually heard it. Sounds easy to put on paper. Like I said, we need to now take it to the next level and really practice this so that they can become habits. It's going from that 2% of people that have had any training. You've now had 45 minutes of training. Here's some ways we can recommend that you practice. The first is just observe whether or not the speaker's nonverbals are congruent with what you're saying. We didn't go deep into nonverbals because I think people understand that. When you're talking to someone, especially when you've got that attending behavior and acknowledgement, you can really pick up on what is the person not saying with how they're interacting. A great tip we talk about is just actually picturing what the speaker is saying. So that's in your head. Run that movie of what they're saying, the names, the details, what does it feel like? What are the emotions? That's going to really help you, one, calm down your mind and be really focused on them, but it helps you actually really tune into what's happening. I think we beat the cell phone one to death. You get the point about that. One of the things that can be really helpful for, say, me, someone who is a very enthusiastic talker and someone who gets very excited very quickly in a conversation, is just practice putting in a pause for responding. What this can look like is in a meeting, if you are someone that really likes to get involved, maybe practice not being the first one to raise your hand in response. That little practice in meetings is actually going to help you in your one-on-one conversations too. Related to that is don't interrupt. Jamie can attest. I tend to be very, very excited, and especially with someone that I know really well and someone I know a lot about our family. I know about what our likes and dislikes because we've been working together. It can be very easy for me to just jump in and finish your sentences for us. Not always a great thing because you're not necessarily always going to be right. And then don't tailgating is again the way to stop thinking about, a way to think about, am I just waiting for you to finish so I can jump in with my solution, my acknowledgement, what I want to say to make you feel better, or am I letting you actually have that time to think about it yourself? Another thing to practice is just think in conversations on a dial. How much are you transmitting? How much are you doing the talking, asking questions, offering solutions, and how much are you just listening? And think about that in one-on-one meetings, walk around stores or departments, really in terms of listening. How much are you talking versus how much you're listening? And again, because I know we've got a lot of like detail graph people, this graph we're showing is not to say this is the right answer, but it just helps you get in a picture in your mind, how much am I talking versus how much am I listening? Very hard, by the way, in a webinar when we're the only ones here with live mics. Yeah. But, when push comes to shove, when it's getting tough, when you're not really sure, have I heard it right? There's a really great last minute check that can help you get through that. And that's to ask yourself these 3 questions. Does the person need what I'm about to say? Do they need that information? Do they really need it right now? And do they need it right now from me? Those 3 questions a lot of times can help you really wait and figure out, are you talking for the right reasons? Or are you just trying to put your filters, barriers, and blockers out there for them? So just to wrap up, a couple of things to do. Have generous curiosity about the person. Again, the challenges of 45 minutes and 5 steps is not going to help you be the most empathetic listener. A lot of empathy comes with the long, slow, intentional process of actually getting to know the people in your span of care and that you're going to be working with. Use door openers to get them to share more. It helps you make sure that you're keeping the focus of the conversation on them, and embrace that silence. Just allow it to happen. I practiced my 4 seconds. Some things to avoid: don't try to coach or solve problems. We get it, big challenge for people who are in positions where your job is to solve problems for people. It's a whole nother class, but we really work hard with people with listening. You actually can get on the road at helping people solve problems for themselves. Avoid the data mining. I mentioned the airline company. I'm a lifelong airline geek. When I am having coaching sessions with pilots, I want to know about the airplanes they're flying. This conversation is not about me. And most of the time when you're in a coaching or listening situation, all those details aren't that. And again, be really aware of the well-intentioned non-empathetic responses. Just to sort of wrap all this up, I'm going to tell you a little story about the Hubble telescope. Told you I'm an airplane and air and spaceship geek. When they launched the Hubble telescope, there was a lot of excitement because this was going to be this amazing, well-crafted, well-rehearsed, well-engineered way of getting the perfect view of the stars and being able to interpret and map our galaxy. The problem was it got up there, and with all of this well-intentioned process, it just didn't work. So NASA had to spend about $2.7 billion in today's standards to fly a whole corrective lens up that they put on top of the telescope. And now this day we're getting really great, clear images. The moral of the story is listening is your corrective lens. It is the way that we can actually get more quickly, more accurately, and in the most helpful way possible to what the actual person needs. 5 skills of listening, that's what we're asking you to practice. Obviously, as Jamie mentioned, this 45 minutes is actually part of a 2-day program on listening where we can bring in a lot of other topics, go a little bit deeper. We get into feedback, we get into confrontation, we get into that powerful one of recognition. If you'd like to hear more, we invite you to visit us at ccoleadership.com. Jamie and I'd be more than happy to hear from you directly. Also can't speak high enough about Everybody Matters, the book. The chairman of Barry Waymiller really has outlined his idea of truly human leadership, which is all founded in listening. And it's a great way to get more about how listening and caring can actually lead to a very highly effective company.